seeking liberation, finding life, working at low-paying secretarial jobs, getting demoted because I was planning to have a baby, being asked by my female supervisor, if we had a fight, whose side would you be on? His because he is Chinese, or mine because I am a woman? Being told I could not attend meetings of sales representatives because I wanted to know too much, which was the truth. Seeking liberation, finding voice, organizing with the Women Writers Union at San Francisco State, demanding for the inclusion of more women and people of color faculty in creative writing and literature, debating with lesbian separatists for the right to be a straight feminist, seeking liberation, finding community, my gender, my ethnicity, my working class roots, fighting racist and sexist stereotypes in film and literature. One Asian American woman's story is not all Asian American women's stories. Charlie Chan, a fake Asian played by whites on screen. Defending a revolutionary Japanese American, Wendy Yoshimura. Supporting Asian and Latino workers from race, sex, and wage exploitation. Organizing for a sexually abused African American woman who defended herself. Co-founding an Asian American feminist writing collective, Unbound Feet. I stayed active all these years because I realized there was power in working in an organization, in the movements. Doing things alone, bowling alone, if you will, changes nothing. Nothing. It doesn't change anything. You can gaze at your navel only so long, then you got to get up and brush your teeth and do things, right? Working with sisters and brothers toward a common goal accelerated my quest for personal freedom toward collective power. I sought out the art and literature of women of color in particular and those of other countries, especially workers and revolutionary fighters. One of the poems I discovered was Woman. How sad it is to be a woman. Nothing on earth is held so cheap. Boys stand leaning at the door like gods fallen out of heaven. Their hearts brave the four oceans, the wind and dust of 1,000 miles. No one is glad when a girl is born. By her family sits no store. When she grows up, she hides in her room, afraid to look at a man in the face. No one cries when she leaves her room, her home, suddenly as the clouds when the rain stops. She bows her head and composes her face. Her teeth are pressed on her red lips. She bows and kneels countless times. She must humble herself even to the servants. His love is distant as the stars in heaven, yet the sunflowers bends towards the sun, their hearts more sundered than water and fire. 100 evils are heaped upon her. Her face will follow the year's changes. Her Lord will find new pleasures. This was written by Fu Shan, who died in A.D. 278, and which was translated by Arthur Waley. I use this example because as a feminist, as a Chinese American woman, I just never understood why women suffer so much oppression. So although this poem is ancient, it describes the degraded conditions of women in old China. But women have not always been victims of mistreatment and sexist degradation at the hands of men under patriarchy, under feudalism, and hierarchy. In the ancient matriarchy, women were leaders. Radical Women agrees with Marx and with Frederick Engels' classic work, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, that the first division of humans into oppressed and oppressor occurred between men and women. We women help property communally. Then patriarchy descended and property was placed in private hands. Engels does not ascribe the battle between the sexes to any inherent evil in one gender, but rather in the inexorable development of technology, the forces of production, and the corresponding upheavals in culture and family formations. This method of analysis is called historical materialism. We women were once equal. Our position in society stems directly from our role in social production and not from biology. Class difference did not exist. The source of women's power was the original gender-based division of labor. But when surpluses first developed through the introduction of domestic herds of cattle, it was the division of labor that gave rise to conflict and the subjugation of the female sex. Primitive communism was supplanted by private property, and mother right was overthrown by father right, patriarchy. The monogamous family unit emerged as a cruel mechanism devised for the perpetuation of private property through the sexual fidelity of the wife. A brutal system of control over women was imposed and eventually crystallized with the invention of the state to serve the ultimate repressive authority. Pre-revolutionary China, the native country of my immigrant parents, is but one example of how women were treated as property, bought and sold into domestic servitude and into prostitution, without rights, without voice. Numerous women for 1,000 years had their feet bound to keep them in place. Education for women was the province of the upper class. My mother and her female ancestors were uneducated peasants who worked the land to survive. And there is, I'll add this, is that the women who didn't have their feet bound had duck's feet, which is actually a positive description, because the bound feet of women in China were called lotus and all these things, and it was erotic and all those kinds of things, but at the same time it really represented a reality for the women in China. So understanding the origin of women's oppression is crucial for the road ahead, and that understanding, coupled with women's experience throughout the world and with the kind of system that we are living under, leads to socialist feminism, from which flowers our work for the total liberation of the female sex. Fighting the world is women's work. As a secretary for most of my working life, I experienced, along with my female coworkers, just how discriminated we were. Being low paid was one thing. Fighting for breaks and even the right to dress in pants was another. Child care, that was our personal responsibility. Unions did not exist in most of the places that I worked. A secretarial perk in the form of lunch with the boss on National Secretary's Day was the norm. Just give me a raise, goddammit. But I had my skills. I typed, I took shorthand, bookkeeping, filing, all those things that are supposed to be what they call shit work was the best shit work in the world, and you learn it. And I learned to coordinate meetings and fly people in and out of town and all those kinds of things. And even though I realized I was a wage slave, I could think and I could talk with my coworkers and realize that I did not have to go with the status quo and that workers could organize. One of the most important revelations of my being a white-collar worker was this. We office workers, mostly women and people of color, could shut this country down. But this was only possible by my meeting other radicals, talking to them, studying feminist, labor, radical, and left history.